Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special episode in Focus. The G20 Seoul Summit officially came to close with adoption of Seoul Statement on the 12th. It was certainly the priceless outcome of the painstaking efforts of the Korean government, which negotiated and harmonized the dissenting voices in the uneven global economy over the past year. So now join our expert discussion on the outcomes and implications of Seoul G20 Summit. Allow me to introduce the three expert guests in the studio. Joining us on my right is Dr. Kim Byung-ju, Chief Executive of Kim Lee and Partners. Always pleasure to see you, Dr. Kim.
Thank you.
Well, to my left are Dr. Kim Pil-hyun, who is a research fellow at the Korea Economic Research Institute. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
And then next to him, the Professor Thomas Bishop, who comes from the Department of Economics at Sungkyunkwan University. Well, thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you.
Well, actually, just before the press conference was ended, so before starting discussion, let's watch the video clip of the press conference.
먼저 프레임워크에 있어서는 앞서 말씀드린 서울 액션 플랜을 마련했습니다. 환율 문제는 시장의 결정에 따르는 환율 제도를 제항하기로 합의했습니다. 또한 환율과 함께 균형 잡힌 경상 수준을 유지하도록 예시적 가이드라인의 수립과 구체적 추진 일정에 합의한 것은 괄목할 만한 진전이라고 하겠습니다. 금융규제 분야에서는 세계 금융위기가 재발하지 않도록 구체적인 개혁 조치에 합의하였습니다.
The G20 Seoul Summit just concluded with the adoption of our Seoul Statement. So at this moment, at this point, I would like to ask the first question to all of you. How do you evaluate the outcomes of the G20 Seoul Summit?
Well, I think it was a smooth closure because there were much concerns and worries because going into the summit, there were many concerns such as, about what the United States has taken as its action right before the summit itself. From the time of Gyeongju ministerial meeting, they undertook the dramatic action of introducing the quantitative easing, and that was a very much concerning action. And there were rumors and words that many of the major economies will actually register their voice of opposition against this action. So some were concerned whether there will be a kind of shouting match that will take place and so on. But it was at the end, all smooth closure. All the members seem to have agreed on key important principles of how the world community should be guided in terms of its action of cooperation among the major economies. So the way I see it, I'm glad the way it ended, and it was a very smooth closure indeed. Okay, yes. How about Dr. Kim?
Yes, I have to agree with Dr. Kim in terms of that. The G20 has been rather successful. If you remember in the past, the worries about how ineffective the G20 will be because there are so many countries with so many different interests. What is more particularly interesting to me was actually the communique reflected lots of interest from the developing countries as well. So it was truly a globalized forum. So in that sense, I think it was a success.
I see. Well, as you may know, that one of the most important issues at the summit was the exchange rate issue. Before the beginning of the G20 Seoul Summit, there was big differences in the opinions on this issue among major economies. Did they make any progress, and what kind of discussion they had on this issue at the summit? Maybe Dr. Kim, will you say something about it?
I think they kind of met in the middle ground because we have two aspects of this. First, everybody agreed that the exchange rate has to be determined by the market forces, but it has to also reflect the economic fundamentals, meaning that if some government views the exchange rate as deviating from the fundamentals, the government has a right to intervene.
I see.
So that's one way to interpret that. Another aspect of this was sort of like to compensate for this arrangement that the communique urged the advanced countries, especially with the reserve currencies, to sort of maintain the exchange rate stability. I think that sort of reflected the position that China has for the United States, control the hot money flow. So, in principle, it's okay, but in this particular aspect, I don't see how they actually translate into actions.
I see. So, Professor Bishop, maybe you had something more about this?
Well, I'll just start by saying I do recognize the conflict, and I thought one of the things that the American Central Bank tried to do to minimize the conflict was to say that even though we are promising that we can pump all of these dollars into the American economy, it's going to be a gradual process and actually a reversible process. So if we see too many negative effects, meaning high inflation in the U.S. and then a rapidly declining dollar, the process can actually work in reverse. And I don't know if that calmed all fears at the G20, but maybe it helped mitigate or lessen some of them.
I see. Well, along with the exchange rate issue, there was another very big issue at the summit. That was the current account balance issue. So what kind of discussion they made about this at this summit? Did they make also progress about this issue?
Well, in my opinion, they didn't make much progress, and actually I think the progress in this area is actually distracting from some more important issues. First of all, I see this as the current account balances are really a sign of some underlying issues in China and the U.S. and some other countries. And those issues are the amount of expenditure on imports and in general relative to the amount of production and income that these countries earn. And basically what is going on in a lot of the exporting countries is there's a lot of production of goods and services, but not enough expenditure on the domestic goods and services. And then in the U.S., you basically have the opposite condition. Not enough production of goods and services and too much expenditure, not enough saving. So that's the underlying issue, and it's really hard to reverse that. But I think addressing the current account balances is a distraction for that underlying issue.
Maybe, yes.
I mean, what we noted in President Lee Myung-bak's last press conference was that he emphasized at this summit the major gain with regard to current account balance discussion was that they specified the time that they're going to announce the overall guideline or indicative guidelines that they're going to talk about. And that time will be sometime during the first half of this next year. And he said that was the main achievement. And even though I'm sure until that point of time, the discussion will continue. And countries like Germany, for instance, we understand still is very much against the idea of setting up that guideline. And guideline, I think, initially was in Gyeongju. After Gyeongju meeting, we were hearing there will be about 4%, 4% as the size of GDP, the 4% of current account surplus. And so, and somehow, economist in me is telling me that 4% of current account surplus as compared to GDP in country A would be quite different from country B's 4%, depending on economic structure and the size of the economy and so on. So I'm sure the opposition and criticism will continue. But however, I think it's worth noticing that President Lee Myung-bak made it clear that major progress at this summit was actually agreeing on the timeline for coming up with the global decision or agreement on what should be done on that front.
Yes, yes.
If I may just interject,
yes, please.
I don't think they would actually set a guideline like 4% of GDP should be current account balance. What they have in place right now is the so-called mutual assessment process, MAP, and that's where they focus on. And I think, in a sense, there's no way to actually force the country to adjust its current account balance without addressing the structural reform. But structural reform, the need for structural reform is also noted in the communique. And in that context, I think a MAP can, sort of act as an additional push to these countries to address their own structural problems and reforms.
Yes, well, yeah. And along with these two the big issues at the summit, actually, the leaders discussed many other issues. So it's too early to say in some sense, but I would like to ask this question to maybe any one of you can answer my question. Well, what do you think were some of the most important progress made at this summit? Discuss about what issue they made the most important progress. Could you?
Well, I don't know if this is the most important, but I saw it as a key development. What the finance people did is they tried to implement what is called Basel III regulations. These are Basel is a town in Switzerland where people all around the world, bankers basically met to determine what should we do to try to prevent another kind of financial crisis from occurring. And they decided on some, in my opinion, pretty innovative things.
I see.
The most basic thing was that they are now going to require regulators to require banks to have higher what is called capital or let me just say extra money in case loans and other kinds of investments do poorly. And so more extra money to protect the banks so that the banks don't get into trouble. And then a kind of innovative thing that they suggested and that the national regulators do is make this measure what is called counter-cyclical. So when times are good, banks have to store even more extra money, and then that prevents them from making what we would call excessive credit, looking back at a financial crisis. And then if they have extra money when a financial crisis does occur, they can actually recover more quickly than otherwise. So I thought that was a pretty innovative, it's an accounting standard, something that hasn't been implemented.
The multilateralism principles is something that's less controversial. And I think the leaders of G20 made an important point out of making the necessity for DDA, Doha Development Agenda negotiation, to go ahead. And I think they mentioned next year, by the end of the year 2011, they expressed the hope to see that process wrapped up. The way I said, based on my understanding, there would be a very ambitious desire, indeed, ambitious vision to be realized. But however, I think they made it clear that they want to have this process kind of get wrapped up by the end of year 2011. I mean, that process has been going for the last 9 years, but not exactly going. It has been stalled for the last 9 years, and finishing up within next year or two would be extremely ambitious. But then again, on that very important multilateral principle on free trade, they agreed on. So I think that was very important.
Some people said that the G20 Seoul Summit was quite special, because a string of innovations from the Korean government. The Korean government suggests some ideas on the agenda of the G20 Seoul Summit. Because of that, the people said the Seoul G20 Summit was quite special. We call them the Korean initiatives. Well, I won't discuss about Korean initiatives with you, but before discussing this one, let's watch the clip which will give more information about Korean initiatives. Let's take a look.
Korea began putting forth initiatives for the G20 from the very first G20 summit in Washington 2008. President Lee Myung-bak's suggestion for a standstill in trade protectionism received widespread support then and was developed into a specific action plan at this G20 Seoul Summit, a much-needed measure in the growing concerns about a potential currency war and protectionist retaliations. As the host of the G20 Summit this year, Korea has also been working hard to build bridges between the different parties in the global economy. The first G20 Business Summit suggested by Seoul acted as a forum for global leaders of the private sector to communicate with the public sector. In bridging the haves and have-nots, Korea achieved success in development agenda and the financial safety net agenda to formulate a specific plan for supporting the growth of developing economies and enhance their financial security by ensuring ready access to emergency capital.
The Korean initiative for the G20 meeting began with the President Lee's suggestion of a standstill in trade protectionism at the first G20 summit, which was held in Washington, D.C. in 2008. And so, by the way, at this the Seoul summit, this standstill agenda was further developed into an action plan. I think it's quite meaningful. So I'd like to ask you, what is the significance of these measures and expected impact of this action on the global economy?
I think that statement against any possibility of protectionism is always important, because when you have leaders of the world's largest economies get together, 20 of them get together, and declare that that's their commitment, and with those commitments, they're further refrain from taking any actions, at least major actions. I mean, always in bilateral trade relationships, countries can try different things, but at least in terms of major actions, they have this mechanism of being refrained from taking such actions. So I think that such declaration is very important. And as we have all these different headaches, in a way, of trade issues among and between major economies like China, United States, and European Union, and so on, I think it's always better, these key principles being repeated. And in that sense, I think what has happened in Seoul this time makes a big difference. And once again, I think before, in my recollection, until this fifth G20 summit, for the last four G20 summits, the iteration of the principle on the importance of multilateral negotiation, Doha development agenda, was never really as strongly articulated as this time. So once again, I thought that was a very important point.
Well, along with the standstill agenda in trade protectionism, the G20 Business Summit is another idea coming from Korean government. I think this was the first G20 Business Summit. Yes. I think this is very important to achieve the more sustainable and equitable the growth of the global economy.
Right.
Do you think that what is the importance of the G20 Business Summit, and then do you think that there is a future perspectives in the global economy? What kind of view do you have about this?
I think having business summit this time was absolutely important, because before, during those four G20 meetings, they were largely for a crisis management mode. The world was in trouble, and it was the government that had to come out and had to show the actions. But now we are entering the post-crisis management period. So in that case, of course, as repeatedly iterated by the leaders of G20, it is the market that has to lead the process. And the market, the key players are the corporations. And that was recognized this time. And based on Korea's initiative, this mechanism was set up. And it looks like it will become a permanent mechanism. We are not sure 100%, but it looks like it will become one. And they undertook a broad scope of issues that they wanted to talk about. And so this was one step that they just took in this important process. And a lot of people seem to be wishing and hoping that this will remain as a permanent process of G20.
I see. Well, anyone? Professor Bishop?
Well, I'll just make a simple comment that I think it is important to try to continue the political support for cooperation, both in the finance area and in the trade area.
Well, the Korean government also suggested some idea to ensure the security, financial security for developing countries. That is the global financial safety network. So certainly at this summit there was a discussion about the global financial safety network. So what kind of discussions they had, and did they reach an agreement about this issue, Dr. Kim?
I think they did. The Korean government learned a lesson from the last year's 2008 financial crisis. The basic the scheme is this: you have IMF, International Monetary Fund, link it to the regional financial institutions to provide liquidity assistance if any country needs it in a case of emergency. The IMF already has what is called the precautionary credit line, flexible credit lines, and the current communique sort of tries to extend it to the regional financial institutions. So, but in Asia, I don't think we have anything like that. But you can also have an Asian Monetary Fund set up, or Chiang Mai Initiative in that sense. But the details have to be ironed out, and I think we're going to have to wait until we see the details. But at least in the sense that we are taking the right direction is important. But another thing that we should remember is that whenever you provide liquidity insurance, it is an insurance, so it also creates moral hazard problem. And it can be severe, especially in Asian countries, developing countries with not as much strong fiscal or monetary disciplines as the advanced countries. So we also have to be mindful that we have to first develop mutual economic surveillance system in place before fully developing this assistance program.
I see. Well, time is very limited. So to sum up today's discussion, I'd like to ask this question. Well, Korea successfully hosted the G20 summit. So certainly the Korea's role in the global economy may be changed. So I would like to ask that, what kind of role in the global economy the Korea will take over or play in the future? Dr. Kim?
Well, clearly, that as the first non-G7 nation holding G20 summit, this time Korea has actually changed its status in the minds of many people around the world, for sure. But I think we have to think about how Korea has done as the host, and I think I can think about this evaluation in 3 stages. Planning and preparation, I think we did an excellent job, the country. I don't think there is much complaint or unhappiness about it. Actually, a lot of people have been quite happy about how the whole thing was planned and prepared. But the second dimension, the process, while it was going on, I was at the press center and I was communicating with other people who were covering this case. There wasn't enough or sufficient communication about what was really happening with outside, like press and the media, and I think that needs to be improved a little bit more, because sharing and communication is always important, and whatever is discussed and then presented as a final product, as important as that is also sharing continuously as an ongoing process of what's happening, information outside. That's important.
I was actually at the Asian Economic Community Forum last week, and I was surprised how much our Chinese friends depend on us. Actually, this professor from one Chinese university came up to me and said, "You don't realize how important role you're going to play." And his point was, the United States is losing its hegemony, and it doesn't quite know how to deal with it. It's not in the position, so it's unstable. China is the second biggest country in the world, but he's admitting that it's had a very different economic system. It's a communist country, so it's not ready to deal with all the other issues that arise from capitalist economies. So Korea is in a very especially unique position to look at both directions and coordinate the policy cooperations.
I have to say that I think Korea did a good job in showing its culture to the outside world and selling its economic vitality. And I think what we're seeing with this summit is just a progression of further openness. We had the World Cup here a few years ago or several years ago, and now the G20 summit, and then who knows what will happen in the next decade. But I suspect we'll see more international summits here.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kim, and another Dr. Kim and Professor Bishop. We discussed about the outcomes and implications of this whole G20 summit. Well, thank you very much, and then I will give the closing remarks, actually. The successful conclusion to the G20 summit was like the end to an incredible journey. Even if the consensus we reached at the summit was not perfect, but we set the stepping stone for the progress to be made in the future. So as we mark the conclusion of the G20 Seoul Summit, let's keep in mind that every ending is a new beginning. Well, this has been Shin Sang-hyo for InFocus, and Thank you very much for watching this program.